Brought to you by Seton Hall University.
We're now joined by Michellene Davis, Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, RWJBarnabas Health. And we're also joined by the Prosecutor of the great County of Passaic, Camelia Valdes. I want to thank both of you for joining us. We just finished a very in-depth, I'm not going to say heated, but pretty candid conversation called Building Trust, Race, Police, and the Community. Michellene, we started this conversation offline a long time ago. Prosecutor, you know this conversation. You are from this community, city of Newark. You're from Camden. You know this issue well. Describe the conversation we just had with 12 really important, significant, and caring folks about police-minority relations.
I think that the discussion that we had this afternoon is one which needs to occur in every community, in every town, in every city across the nation. Really, it was a discussion where individuals were able to put down their title, but take up the arms of being committed to creating a better society. So it was a candid, frank discussion about what tools we've utilized thus far, where we are right now, and the road that we have to travel.
What's your biggest takeaway?
I was encouraged by what I heard in there, because we talked openly and honestly about the very difficult challenges when we talk about the intersection of race, police, and community. And it is a multi-layered discussion, and I think you assembled a tremendous cross-section of professionals that are really working in this field. And so we're all working towards the same goal. Our roles look different, and that's why it's important that we talk to one another. I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that I heard in there, because it's the same. If you really peel back the layers, people are concerned about violence, they're concerned about communities, and they're concerned about how do we move forward from where we are.
We had folks from law enforcement, religious community, healthcare community, Ras Baraka, the mayor of the great city of Newark, part of it, but also racial and ethnic, gender diversity. That's not the norm out there, is it?
Unfortunately, it is not, Steve. You know,
so what does that produce when people just talk to folks who look like themselves? You know, I'm sorry for interrupting, but go ahead.
No, not at all. I think that, you know, what's interesting is the fact that we are all human. And so what you had in that room were individuals who are willing to push past their own humanity, right, in order to achieve that greater good. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, we self-segregate naturally.
Self-segregate.
We self-segregate naturally. You can go into cafeterias at colleges across this nation, and you will see individuals who are sitting with other individuals who look like themselves. You can do the same thing in grammar schools, right? So we have done this over time. We've fought about segregated housing areas. We've pushed back against redlining, and yet and still, there's a natural tendency simply to want to see someone who looks like you, to believe that they come from a background that identifies with yours in order to come together. What we heard in that room today is the fact that we've got to be bigger than that. We've got to be able to push past that and to really reduce the fear that separates us from being closer in proximity and relationship one with another.
So well said, but Camelia, let me ask you this. The risk, I don't know if that's the right word, but having folks who are so different, with different points of view, different backgrounds, ethnicities, race, et cetera, et cetera. What happens when people really put it out there? It gets uncomfortable. It
gets uncomfortable. It's hard. Policing is not for the weak-minded, the weak-spirited. It's not, because we're dealing with violence. We're dealing with social issues. We're dealing with misogyny. We're dealing with racism. We're dealing with death in many ways. And so I think everyone in that room, whether you come from a social work background, an activist background, a law enforcement background, we want the same things. I think the focus on not only individual biases, we've talked about unconscious bias, but from my perspective, talking about systems, policies, things that we can all work on together, bearing upon all of our experiences. And they're different. You know, treating violence as a public health issue.
This is what Michellene talked about,
Michellene talked about public health. We talked about communities. We talked about the value of, or devalue, depending on the situation, on African-American lives. And so it's uncomfortable. It's hard, you know, to be able to sit across from one another and say, look, this is what happens. This is the role of the media. This is the role of law enforcement. And to be able to take away how do we, given the enormity of the challenge, what do we do? And the answer is we keep pushing, we keep working. We keep sharing with one another. And it's not easy, but neither is the issue.
You know, Michellene, let me ask you something. As we listen to the prosecutor, she said something. Again, people were in some ways testifying, if you will. They're putting it out there. When the prosecutor talked about the fact that she's born and raised in this community, she is a person of color. She's the first woman, first Latina, if you will, in this role as the prosecutor of Passaic County. She said in front of everyone, and again, you'll see this on PBS, FiOS, and other platforms, she said that when she's had to deal with certain cases, when in fact an African American is looking for justice at the hands of law enforcement community, and then you are looked at not as someone who is from that community, but as an outsider, one of them, someone in blue.
Correct.
I know I didn't even ask you this till now. What were you thinking? Because you've been friends for a long time.
Full disclosure. Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about her coming on the show and doing this today. And really, I know her as a person, right? But I also know her as a member of that community, right? So I know this young woman. And one of the things we talked about was that if someone attempts to come at her, I'm going to have to get myself together, because I know, Steve, that any reaction that pushes her away, you know, cognitive dissonance is something that we all have the right to practice. We just simply should not, right? So the issue is that it all is a response of fear. It all comes from the place that, recall that even the Black Lives Matter movement what was talked about today, it is a response to an ill upon the land right now. This is not something that was just born out of itself. It is a response to feeling disenfranchised. It is a response to being saddened, to being hurt, to being harmed, and having no one stand up to say, stop doing this to them. Right? So when she enters a room and individuals automatically step back from her, right? They want to create a divide.
Like she could never understand.
Absolutely. You know, I wish that I could say that we chuckle about it, because we know that she's from Newark. We know that you know, we say all the time she's blacker than most, quite frankly, because of the fact that we know her background. But we also know and understand that A, they do not, and B, that they have the right to be concerned, because they're not operating in isolation. They're operating under the historical precedent that's been laid within this country, right? And so the grand news is that she comes to that situation not looking for a fight, but with a heart of compassionate management around the situation.
It's so interesting. You said you didn't take it personally. It hurt, you wanted to cry. Full disclosure, you'll see it on the air. That's not a secret.
Yes.
But the reality is you knew it wasn't about you personally. It was about, as Michellene described, something bigger than you. How the heck do you say to yourself, this is my job, it's something bigger?
I have to stay rooted in faith in order to do this job, because I see people at the absolute worst times of their lives, either because they're victims or they're the survivors of horrific crimes. Not only violence, but sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, fatalities. I see this day in and day out. And so I knew when I chose this particular service that there were going to be some hard times. And so I have to compartmentalize and understand that a lot of times when people are coming at me, as we talk about, they're coming at me because, one, they have access to me. There's a lot of displaced fear. There's anguish. There's confusion. And so I need to take a step back from how I feel personally and understand that if I'm going to be a steward for what law enforcement is trying to do, which is to keep people safe and keep them alive, then that just comes with the work that we have to do.
A couple seconds. As it relates to police-minority relations and building trust, which is what this whole initiative is about, you're usually an optimistic person. How optimistic are you about this?
Wow, Steve, I realize that many are called but few are chosen, and if we are in these roles to influence this particular issue, then we are both, right? So I have to cling to the hope, because hope is at my very core exactly who I am, right? And look to the hills for the tomorrow that I know is going to bring us to that space. I have to remain optimistic.
The alternative is not acceptable?
It is unacceptable to me.
I'm here, and I'm going to continue to stay here, because the work is great, but the opportunities are greater, I think. We have a real opportunity to come together now more than ever. when so many of the discussion is divisive.
That's right.
When we have to pick a side, either it's Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, or all lives matter. When it's, do people feel American or not? Do women, are they included? Do they have a role to play? It's too much for us to say, we're not going to participate, because we all see what happens when you sit it out. And I don't have any intentions of doing that. I can't give up hope. One, I'm from Newark. I'm not wired that way. Two, I think, and we saw it today in that room, discussions that ordinarily wouldn't take place now have a forum and a space to take place. So I'm excited for what can be.
Thank you both, especially for not giving up. Thank you.
Thank you.
As one of America's premier Catholic universities, Seton Hall is a place where leaders learn to excel, both in and out of the classroom, to explore new frontiers, to serve those in need, to succeed as champions, to achieve their dreams. Seton Hall University, where leaders learn.
Also brought to you by JFK Medical Center, International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825, and by the New Jersey Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor,